The women's basketball infrastructure is getting more interesting by the second. Sascha Malas of Overtime is here to tell us about, quite frankly, maybe the most fascinating new way it is happening. Can't wait to get into it. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
Ogunbowale for the win. Good!
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm your host, Howard Megdal. I want to thank you for making us your first listen every day. You guys keep showing up for us the way we show up for you, 6 days a week, talking about the past, present, and future of the women's game. Over 100,000 of you listened last month again. That's 5 straight months. You guys, that's not a fluke. That's a trend. And of course, it is not just me. It is the incredible young, diverse, talented folks over at the Next who are putting together over 100 reported pieces every month on women's basketball. TheNextHoops.com. We had over 1.3 million readers last month. Thank you for showing up for us as well. Make sure you subscribe. $9 a month, $72 a year. It's the women's sports year-round news network we've always needed, and now it's here. And again, that is why I am so excited. We're talking to Sascha Malas, who is part of, what I would say is necessary infrastructure, but it's innovative at the same time. It's called Overtime Select. It is for high school women's basketball players. They're going to begin next summer at OTE Arena in Atlanta. There's so much to get into it, but Sascha, first of all, when you were finally able to put pen to paper and have this come together, take me through what that moment felt like for you.
Wow. I love that question. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and we're really excited about Overtime Select. We have been working on Overtime Select for about a year now. So when the announcement came out, it was so exciting. I was thrilled to be able to talk about it with my friends and family, and obviously the support in the community was unbelievable. But yeah, it was an amazing day, and something that we had been looking forward to announcing for quite some time now.
To me, and we'll get into the details of it because it's important. The details matter in this stuff. But when you see from the start that, all right, there is a league, all right, but there's not just a league, there is a date, there is a place to play, there is a runway to lead up. You have the buy-in, not just of high school stars of today, but you have an advisory board full of folks who understand this mattered. And the people, just to, give some names of people who are part of this, whether we're talking about Simone Augustus, whether we're talking about Nafisa Collier or Haley Jones, Breanna Stewart. These are people who understand the value and what this would have meant when they were coming up. And then there's the third platform of the tripod, which is thinking of it as players building brands, players from day one, from before day one of their collegiate careers, let alone professional careers, are able to build out and give people a sense of who they are. That's a lot. That's a lot to navigate, right? Was there a part of that was, let's say, the most challenging of that coming together? And how did you go about thinking of it as something that was a collective, which, it really is a collective of where women's basketball is today?
Definitely. So for the past year, we've spent countless hours and days just listening and learning. So similar to what we did on the men's side to create OTE, we did a very similar function on the women's side to create Overtime Select. We listened and we learned. We spent hours on the phone with agents, athletes, WNBA players, legends, high school athletes, grassroots families, NCAA athletes to really learn what is necessary, what is missing in the system, and how can overtime be additive. And what we really learned from all of these countless of conversations was that these high school athletes, they want to stay in high school, these women. They want to play in a state championship. They want to continue playing in AAU, the competition in AAU. You know what? It's good, and they want to continue to participate in their AAU schedules and summer calendars. But how can overtime add more competition? How can they elevate the competition level and bring all of the top athletes to one place? How can overtime help build these women's brands? That was the number one priority when we spoke to everybody. Yes, basketball matters, competition matters, but how can we as a company help elevate these high school women so that they can be the next Angel Reese and Paige Beckers and Flau'jae Johnson? And that's what overtime is great at, building brands and building these personalities of youth athletes. So what we really spent over the last year was really determining what is missing in the system, how can overtime be disruptive, but also additive and lift the women's basketball community as a whole. And that's kind of how we came to the development and creation of Overtime Select.
I think it's interesting too. It just feels like overtime is situated in a way that no other company I can think of would be to do this, to not just only have that pattern, but again, you guys have made a lot of progress. You've been in the women's sports space for a minute, like this is not some fly by night entry into what girls and women are doing in basketball. Do you feel like that helped, let's say, cut the red tape in a lot of ways to be able to put together an infrastructure here going into next year that, you come in, you walk in the door, people know about overtime?
Definitely. So our overtime WBB platforms across TikTok and Instagram have 2.7 million followers. We're followed across the board. Our fans love us. And what we really learned is that the next generation of fans loves to support the next generation of athletes. Mm-hmm. So this was a natural progression for us to create Overtime Select. I always like to talk about Zia Cook. She was an overtime high school athlete that we followed when she was in high school. And she is the perfect example of all that we're trying to build with Overtime Select. She was the high school athlete that we followed. She participated in our first takeover and won Queen of the Court in 2019. We've since NIL obviously have been able to work with her on countless brand deals and opportunities. We went with her to the WNBA draft. She came back and actually coached and mentored our athletes for our most recent takeover events that we've done in Atlanta since building the OT arena. And now she's an advisor for Overtime Select. Like, what a cool story and trajectory. And now she's bought in. She loves overtime. She knows what we can do. And that's just one story, right? Like Paige Beckers, similar. Flau'jae Johnson, similar. All these women that we've been following for years are now building a brand with us, which is unbelievable.
And Zia Cook, again, and the thing I want to keep emphasizing to our listeners is the way in which all this connective tissue is put together in place already, right? Zia Cook, part of what you're doing here. So is Erin Kane, who represents Zia Cook, right? So, and Erin, who was a guest on the program as well in recent times. We talked a little bit about this, just the idea that you're able to, from soup to nuts, have the ability not to just build the plane while you're flying the plane, which has been the case so much of the time in women's basketball. And frankly, in terms of women's sports, how far do you want to go back? Basically, back to the very beginning of women's basketball, which began shortly after James A. Naismith came up with the game itself, right? And yet there's always been this separation, whereas the men's stories have been one story, and we're able to follow, and we're able to tell them from start to finish. And getting the opportunity to do that, certainly for me as somebody who tries to emphasize this on the media side, is incredibly exciting. So I want to be back with you in segment 2 to talk a little bit about how you got here and what this has meant to you personally. First, Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. And if you're like me, you've been trying to figure out, Tommy DeVito, how do I take advantage of the fact that the Giants' third-string quarterback can't lose? Well, FanDuel's got just the opportunity for you. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 money line bet. That's $150, but only if your team wins. So I guess there are people who bet on the Eagles. Think that's a decent team. I guess so. They're not the Tommy DeVito Giants, of course. And so you want to make sure you get this because $150, if your team wins, you can use it on everything: spreads, player props, over, under, and more. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to help celebrate the NFL season. Again, that's FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So, Sascha, as we think about your journey here, and you're a Big Ten product, so obviously, coming from Wisconsin, you've seen firsthand. I would argue, I mean, certainly now it's the best women's basketball conference in America, as it has. Was the Big Ten have 28 teams now after all the expansion? But
It's it's unbelievable.
because I expect any moment you get an email, it'll turn out to I personally am now in the Big Ten, just because it's never. But on top of that, just take me through your process, your discovery of the women's basketball, the women's sports space, and what it meant to you growing up.
Definitely. So I did not play Division I basketball. I was not a basketball player, but I did play recreational basketball. Was coached by my dad, and I was an athlete growing up. I was a tennis player, and I water skied on the Wisconsin club team, and I'm very involved in the sports community, and it's just been a passion point of mine for years now. And I'm a huge supporter of women's sports in general. I obviously, like you said, went to Wisconsin. Wisconsin, not just basketball, Wisconsin women's volleyball is amazing. Wisconsin women's hockey. I can just be like the spokesperson for all Wisconsin women's sports. They're unbelievable, and it's been so amazing to see how much they have been able to grow. When I graduated from Wisconsin, I worked at Octagon as a trainee and worked for Alyssa Romano, and Erin Kane actually was at Octagon at the time. So there are two women that are very, very close to my heart, and they exposed me so much to the women's basketball space and the landscape of women's sports. And when I came to overtime, I was doing all things basketball and football, and really was focused on growing overtime social platforms and brands. And we had been, like I said, a leader in the women's basketball space for years now. And I kind of started to wiggle my way in, if you say. And as we started to get more deals and RFPs for products, I would pitch women athletes and participants to be the spokesperson for a specific branded campaign. And I was able to really find my niche here in the women's basketball space, working with unbelievable agents across the board, from Erin and Jade at Clutch, and Lindsay at Wasserman, and Zach at WME. And it's been really remarkable to build a network of amazing agents that represent amazing athletes. And that was really how I started in the women's space here, was by expanding my network, really identifying different women that we could have participate in branded content at Overtime. And it's been honestly so much upward growth and trajectory. It's unbelievable. And the amount of campaigns and RFPs and content that we have coming in, and inbound requests to work specifically on women's campaigns has grown since my time in Overtime. It's definitely been a huge learning curve, but it's been an unbelievable place to be. And I'm very fortunate that I've had the opportunity to be in this space, especially now, obviously.
And I'm glad you mentioned, there's so many people, on the agency side who don't necessarily get the same kind of attention, but they're the ones opening the doors. It's Erin going into a room. Alyssa Romano is somebody who should be shouted out every day. As far
I
as
agree.
for the doors she knocks down along the way. And so, that's so fascinating to me, because you talked about this learning curve, but in a lot of ways, the space is kind of being created in real time. And I guess I wonder, even just, it's a relatively short time that we're talking about, but you think back to like Zia Cook there were people who kind of treated her like a one-off, right? This idea that, oh, wow, she's exciting, but how much easier is it to have those conversations here in 2023, here in a moment where we're seeing explosions, the NIL space, yes, but in revenues, we're seeing explosions in what people have commonly come to understand the sports properties are worth, not just people like us who are saying, hey, it has a chance to be this. But now you can't argue with the numbers that are being put up. You can't argue with 10 million people watching the national championship game. You can't argue with the valuation numbers that come out of Sportico on National Women's Soccer League franchises. Like, how much easier does that make walking into that room for you today?
Yeah, I mean, you're saying it. Women's sports are good for business, and that is the exact case that we have been making, and it's really prominent right now. But it is, the fact is that women's sports are good for business, and Overtime wants to be involved in that and wants to continue adding value, not just to obviously companies that participate and amplify women's sports, but similar to what you said, to all these NIL opportunities that we can also provide athletes that are receiving all these different brand deals now because they are so prominent in the women's sports space and growing their personal. I'm so sorry about that.
No, all good, all good.
But no, it's been really amazing to be a part of, and it's so true. That walking into a room and pitching different brands to be a part of Overtime Select, and working with our sales team who has secured 4 amazing partners already for a league that hasn't even started yet. It's unbelievable, right? We have State Farm, Gatorade, Adidas, Nissan all on board to partner on this endeavor and this league because they believe in it, and similar to Overtime, believe that women's sports is really good for business.
I mean, to me, and again, I know I said this up top, but I just can't emphasize it enough. There's experiments, and there should be experiments in this space as people are discovering where and how to build this stuff. But to come on day one saying, we have these 4 major corporate partnerships who are going to help us build what this needs to look like, it's just so significant. It's so important. So just to the listeners at home, like, please understand that's what we're talking about as it relates to season 1 coming up next summer. Now, I want to go and have a fun thought experiment with you to take me there. Okay. So take me at what you're visualizing. What does day 1 feel like? What are you most excited about? And what is your day 1 of that on the ground at OTE Arena in Atlanta? I'm sure you've thought about it.
I have. That's a great question. You're actually the first person that's asked me that to really visualize what day 1 is looking like. But I have felt the electricity in the rooms for the takeover events that we've done in the past. And yes, we're not starting with a takeover. It'll be league play, but there is something so unique and special about high school women's basketball players. They are so competitive. Their energy is out of this world. And I can tell you that they're going to be just as excited as myself and the rest of our team. But they're going to walk into the room or into the OT arena. And I think I'm most excited to just see their faces, to see when they have their jersey reveals and all of the work that they've put in leading up to the start of the league, because it's not just us that are building this league. We're working with these women to help build the league also. We're working with them to determine dates that work. We're working with them so they can build their jerseys and their brands and their team names. There's so much that goes into it on the Overtime side, but we're also really leaning on the athletes that are the faces of this league, because it's not just good for us, it's good for them to learn how to be businesswomen, right? So they're walking in and learning how to be a businesswoman and how to have all of these PR media training and how to talk to college coaches and financial literacy courses and all the different opportunities we're going to give them. But I'm most excited to just see how they interact with each other and their faces and the competition, because I've seen it and it's electric, and I'm looking forward to 4 weeks of that.
There's been so much talk through the years in our space about how it's important or it's the right thing to do. And it's all of those things, right? but not enough focus to my mind on just how incredibly fun it is.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad to hear you talk about it in those terms. That's what it comes down to, right? Like there's a lot of money to be made in this space, and there's proper training to allow these young women to learn how to do it, to be educated in a way that the education didn't exist because literally the system didn't even exist
Yep.
5 years ago in the way that we're talking about it today, and in a way that I frankly expect will pale in comparison to the way we're talking about it 5 years from now. But then that bottom line, to just like enter that arena, to feel, to understand that collective excitement, it's going to be amazing. I'm so excited for it. Be back with you for final thoughts about what and how you have had envisioned this when you were at Mamaroneck High School in just a second. But first, Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by PrizePicks. And now with the NBA season here, you can pick combo projections across multiple sports. Again, that's football and basketball, and something that PrizePicks calls a specials league. So it's a league specifically created for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports. So for example, LeBron James and Travis Kelce, you can have them both, a combination of 10.5 three-pointers made and reception. So a really interesting, fun combination. You can even play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill or comedian Andrew Schultz. You just go into the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names. So how do you do this? Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnba, and guess what you also get? A first deposit match of up to $100. Just use the code LOCKEDONNBA. Again, prizepicks.com/LOCKEDONNBA. Use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. So I want you to take me back, Sascha, to you are at Mamaroneck High School. You are thinking about your future. Did you envision anything like this? Is there any way to imagine the world that we have gotten to here in 2023?
Wow. Okay. That's an amazing question. When I was in high school,
Yeah.
like I said, I didn't know what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be when I grew up. I played tennis. Both of my brothers played lacrosse and football in school. I grew up in like a very avid sports family. My brother's middle name is actually Jet, named after the New York Jets, like crazy sports family.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I always wanted to work in sports. It's interesting because when you're in high school, and I'm like thinking about it now as when I was 17, and you don't necessarily notice all like what's going on in the sports industry. You're living in high school and you're like you care about so many different things that are not necessarily what's going on in the actual business side of the industry. And I don't think I ever, like thinking back on that, I don't think I ever would have in a million years imagined that this is the position I would be in today. I knew I always wanted to work in sports. I did like some internships in LMC TV, Larchmont Mamaroneck TV station, where I thought I wanted to be on camera, broadcasting, but I had no idea. Like truly, honestly, had no idea that this is where the sports industry was going to go. Had no idea that this is how NIL would have changed the game and the landscape of the space on both the men's and women's side. And I'm honestly so unbelievably grateful to be in the position I am today.
Well, I mean, to your point, I mean, that challenge is you can't see an absence. You can't see a thing that isn't there. And so that to me, and it goes back to like why I'm so impressed with this is like to have a vision for something that didn't exist, I think is the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
And so, if I can just, pull it and close that circle on the other side of it. You're now here at the beginning of something, that has the potential to have enormous ramifications for the way in which women are able to participate. They're never going to be unable to see something because now it exists. And I guess, have you given yourself that opportunity to kind of take that step back and say, like, why, like, I'm present at the creation of something, and I don't believe I'm overstating it. I legitimately think that we're talking about something that's going to matter for the way that young women, when they are 14, 15, 16 years old, can dream.
Yeah.
That feels enormous to me. Have you let yourself think about that, to be present at something like that?
I always have to take a moment to reflect on all of these things, right? It's so, you're living in it, and we're working so hard. We have I also would be remiss if I didn't. There's so many people that I know over time that have been involved in this from the beginning. Our CEO and president, Zach and Dan, have been unbelievably supportive and involved. Our chief content officer, Mark Cohn, and then we have a lot of women who have been just huge champions, from Shay Dawson and Minty DeBruce, who have just been remarkable to work with. And I think that you have to take the time to reflect on it. You're right. You're absolutely right, because you're living in it and you're working so hard, and you want this to be the best thing possible and influence and change the lives of so many athletes. But you're right. Like, I want it to be the next place for, I want this to be the thing that when you're in middle school, I want to be in that league. How do I get there? It's the first step to get to the NCAA. It's the first step to get to the WNBA. And even if you don't have the opportunity to eventually make it to the league, overtime did something to affect you and change your life in the high school time, where you got to build your brand and hopefully have other opportunities outside of just basketball as well. That it is so important to reflect. I certainly don't do it enough, and take the time to think about how this could change so many people's lives. At least that's what I hope for. But the goal is that this isn't year one, it's year one, but it's going to continue to get bigger, and hopefully there will be a lot more women a part of it in the upcoming years, that we can continue to influence their lives as well.
No one can predict the future, but what you have done is created something with every bit of stability necessary to do it. I'm so impressed. I'm so excited to see it. Like I said to you before we got on here, we will continue to cover. We've got people to make sure we are covering it across the multimedia platforms that we have. We will continue to amplify. Sascha Malas, congratulations on the very beginning of all this. To our listeners, thank you as always for being part of what we do every day. We will be back with you tomorrow. As always, I am your host, Howard Megdal, wishing all of you a wonderful day.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.